Welcome to Gourmet Brewing. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your joining me as we grow our beverage skills together. We'll go live at the top of the hour, but I really appreciate you joining us early because we've got Michael Fairbrother here today from Moonlight Meadery. Actually, we just put on the chat there a discount that he's providing for everybody that is joining us today on the webinar. So check that out. But this is audience participation. Michael has already put his part of the audience participation by giving us the discount code. But I need to hear from you. So first of all, Michael, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great, thank you.
I don't know what time zone I'm in.
It's probably Hawaii.
That's right, I think so. So can everybody hear and see Michael okay? If you can hear and see Michael okay, how about writing in the chat that you can hear him and see him okay? So I'm looking for a little chat over there. All good here, Kevin says. Okay, Peter. Oh, Peter from Australia. Hey, Peter. Peter did our last webinar. Phenomenal, good webinar. Crystal, can hear and see you. Awesome. That is perfect. So hopefully the webinar will hold up the whole time and we won't have any dropouts. So right now, I'd love to hear Michael. I so enjoyed meeting you at HomebrewCon. I even got to try, I think I had 2 samples of your Utopia.
Nice.
That was phenomenal. So what else is brewing?
So we just made a 1,000-gallon batch of our strawberry mead yesterday. So it's a little over 110 gallons of strawberry concentrate with 2,600 pounds of orange blossom honey from Mexico. And the whole meadery right now just smells amazing as the yeast is starting to actively do its job.
I had a phenomenal strawberry mead down here in South Carolina. It wasn't actually quite done yet, but it was like I'd had strawberry beers before and was generally pretty disappointed. But mead, is there something about the mead process when done right that strawberry can be just phenomenal?
So strawberry is like one of the hardest ingredients to work with, and I'd say peach is probably right up there as well. Okay. So it's not like working with a black currant, which has a lot of dominance in the flavor profile, but strawberry is really light, and so to balance it against the honey, you really got to use a lot, and to really get it perfect, you just have to really watch how clean your meads finish out and avoid any kind of oxidation, because that'll turn your strawberry brown.
Well, I have had some of those, and they were oohing and ahhing, and I'm kind of going, I wouldn't know there was strawberry in it.
Yeah, I tend to go fruit forward. So we mix all of our fruit in with the honey at the start of fermentation. So yesterday's batch started at 32 bricks, which is about 1.128, I think, starting gravity.
Wow.
So it's a big mead.
I will have to get, what is the name of that one? Can you remind me?
That one's called Kisses.
Kisses. Okay.
Yeah, so our tagline for our company is Romance by the Glass. So I've tried to keep to a story, more or less. If you've kind of figured out our branding and the packaging, we really, back when I first started, read through a guide that really talked about marketing and branding towards women. And, that's really kind of what I learned from being a home brewer. When I would take out my bottles of beer at a party, I'd see my home brewing friends hanging around. But when I pulled out a bottle of my mead, specifically Desire, every woman in the room was knocking somebody over. And I said, okay, this business is here. Now, how do I make it work?
Well, I love that. Well, we're going to talk more about that shortly. For those of you that have joined us early, and I really appreciate everybody that comes in early, I just wanted to kind of point out some of the logistics with the webinar. We will go over that again. And I already see, gosh, the bottom is already filling up with questions. 4 questions already, Michael. So the Ask a Question box right there in the center is where you can ask Michael the questions. We also have a poll, and I think the poll is maybe around there. There's 2 of them there. One of them is really just choosing a choice as to how far along you are with your mead. And so far, Michael, looks like 80% of our audience enjoys and brews mead a little. And 100% so far, this is their first Moonlight Mead. So we're breaking ground here.
Awesome.
You have some new converts. So we will go through that. We'd love to get your questions. The questions will be answered in the second half of the webinar. Now, we've got maybe a few seconds left, Michael, before we go live at the top of the hour, but I was amazed at HomebrewCon when I was tasting all your meads. I could never perceive the alcohol. I never knew that could be done. What is it about your meads that hide the alcohol?
So this works for making beer as well as making mead or cider. So yeast that ferments hot will create a lot of the off flavors. So we really control temperature control. I had the fortune of brewing with Jamil at Heretic Brewing Company in the past, and we both kind of had the exact same conversation, which is temperature control is 90% of how you make a great product. The other 90% would be sanitation. So those two things and quality of ingredients. So I guess, it's 30, but all really kind of play into it. So for the yeast that we use, and I know there's thousands of different yeasts that you can use, but for me, mastering one yeast was, the skill set I wanted to accomplish. And I think I've done that, and I can make a 14% alcohol mead that doesn't taste like 14%.
No, it's a little scary, but we're about 30 seconds away from starting, but I really did enjoy your HomebrewCon. The presentation was great, but your meads were even better, and what a phenomenal opportunity to try all those different meads. And that's a good timing to get that done. We've got a good crowd here today. So at the top of the hour, which is less than 10 seconds away, I'm going to go quiet, and then we will introduce this for everybody else at the top of the hour. Welcome to Gourmet Brewing. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I want you to know how much I appreciate your allowing me to join you in growing our beverage skills together. I'm a certified Cicerone, and I'm a certified BJCP judge, and I'm working on advanced ranks. The Facebook study groups and these webinars are my way of sharing what I'm learning on my beverage journey. Well, it's been a few weeks since our last webinar with Peter Simmons. He was from Australia, or as Peter said, Australia. And we got a chance to taste some of the sparkling ales and hear Peter describe that. If you missed that, that was a great program. Check on it and some of the other programs by simply clicking the follow button. That is in the upper right corner. I'm going to try and point to it. I think that's getting it. No, other way. There we go. Sorry, it switches on me. And I've got some lag on my other screen here. So, so you can catch that. And if you'll click on the three lines in the upper left and choose my channel, then that'll give you a chance to look through those. I will also include a link to that in the follow-up email. If you noticed, I'm emphasizing gourmet brewing in this webinar, and I haven't talked too much about that in the past. I don't intend to limit these strictly to beer. I've learned so much from so many other beverages that I want to expand the programming to other beverages. This is our first mead webinar, so this is actually the first non-beer webinar we've done, and there'll be others. It might include gourmet coffee, tea, kombucha, and others. I'm interested in your feedback, but I think enlarging our beverage experience will help us create flavor memories that will help with all of our tasting skills. Speaking of that, today we have Michael Fairbrother. Michael is an award-winning founder and head of the Mead maker at Moonlight Meadery, and this is the largest winery in New Hampshire. He's been making meads for 24 years, commercially for 9 years. He teaches at the Robert Montevet Institute. He's on the National Honey Board as the Mead Ambassador. He exports meads to Australia, Japan, Hong Kong, Canada, and of course right here in the United States. So, Michael, welcome to Gourmet Brewing. Tell me what's fermenting there at Gourmet Brewing. Tell me what's, I knew it screwed something up. Tell me what's brewing there at Moonlight Meadery.
Yeah, so we have, during the summer, it's pretty much our slowest time of the year for fermentation, but we sold through one of our more popular meads. So we've got a 1,000-gallon batch of our strawberry mead fermenting right now. That's called Kisses. It should be done fermenting in the next month, and then we'll cross-flow filter it and get it down and ready to bottle in the next month and a half or so.
Okay. Well, that sounds awesome. And by the way, I haven't had any mead yet, in case you're wondering. I'm waiting for that to show up in the chat. Michael, could you give us just a quick 10,000-foot view summary of what we're going to learn today?
So it's my goal to be able to talk to you about melomels and how to judge them and what to look for in a really well-balanced melomel. I'm going to present a sweeter one, but I will talk about dry and semi-dry and how the fruits can really offset or play against the honey and what you want to look for and how you want to evaluate those when you get a chance and how to make them.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that. I know I got a lot out of it when we had our pre-meeting for the webinar, and that was immensely helpful for me as I prepared for my mead tasting exam. Well, before we move into the webinar, there's just a few housekeeping items I'd like to quickly go through before we move into Michael's presentation. First of all, this is not an official BJCP webinar. These are just my opinions, and they're Michael's opinions. If your webinar is not playing correctly, simply refresh your browser window, and that will correct most issues. If you can't hear, double check that you've unmuted or turned up your speakers. And we have more webinars after this. I know you were wondering because there haven't been any since Peter's webinar in June. Well, summer's been busy, but we have lots of folks lined up to do some more, and I'll be announcing those dates very soon. Andrew Liberto is going to be helping us on becoming a better beer judge. It's somewhat a BJCP 101, and this is going to be a great webinar to invite friends to that have dabbled in becoming a BJCP beer judge but just don't quite know where to start. John Blickman is going to be joining us on sizing your nano brewery, and that's going to be cool. Jennifer Pereira, I actually judged with Jennifer at HomebrewCon, so that be careful. If we judge together, you might get invited on the webinar. Jennifer was just a phenomenal judge at HomebrewCon, and she's going to be talking to us about diacetyl. And I think that's going to be a really interesting webinar because I've heard so many people, we had a debate actually on the Facebook page asking about whether you could perceive a slickness in the mouth and not perceive necessarily an aroma from diacetyl. And that was an interesting question. Dr. Mark Rushman is going to be joining us as well as Ron Pattinson. We had an earlier webinar with Ron, and this was on porters, and I think this next one is going to be on milds. That was what was asked for, and he's going to be doing that. We also have a couple of more things. If you want to contact Michael, there is a button right there in the center of your screen. Click on that, and that will get you a form to get in contact with Michael. We've also got some polls. I mentioned the polls, and we've also got the ask a question. And Michael, you're already up to 6 questions. You're setting a record. Probably the most important part, these series of webinars I'm creating for the BJCP study groups. And if you're not a member of those BJCP study groups, I would encourage you to join them. It's on Facebook. Just do a search for BJCP 101, 201, or in this case, Mead. We have a new group forming for Mead. It's been out a few months, but we haven't talked about it a lot. So those of you here, please join that. Please answer all the questions. I am strict in these groups. I don't want any trolls. And so you won't get approved if you don't answer all the questions. These seminars are not free to me. There is an actual cost. So they're viewer supported. So I would just encourage you, if you're enjoying the webinars, please consider contributing. That helps offset the expenses associated with these webinars. And I also want to thank our Patreon supporters, Andy Glidden, Brent Dingus, Clay Bunn, Dan Saka, Gene Jockey, Jerry Pringle, Marino Lanza, and Paul Clammers. So appreciate you guys, and just let you know that everybody will get an email at the end of the webinar. It'll include links to the recording, any resources that Michael has, previous webinars, and also links to the 3 BJCP Facebook groups. So Michael, I have been dying to open this Moonlight Meadery desire that I've got sitting here. Can we jump into this?
Certainly can. I've already had a few sips. It tastes amazing. So while you're opening that bottle, let me describe what we're gonna be trying. So this is a recipe. It's based off of Kurt Stock's mead recipe. He had the triple berry melomel that I read about probably a little over 12 years ago now. And what I loved about Kurt's meads is Kurt loves to use blackcurrant, and he introduced me to blackcurrants. So blackcurrants is a little fruit that has a ton of tannins and a ton of tartness, and it really complements the way the honey's going to present in the background. On top of that, he used sour cherries and blueberries. So the blueberry really works as like a glue between or bridge, I guess is the right way I'd want to put it, between the currant and the cherry. So part of what you're looking for in a really well executed mead is how do you balance all those flavors? And when I used to make this as a home brewer, I would go to the local gourmet section of my grocery store and buy equal quantities of R.W. Kunston's Just Juice. So just blackcurrant juice, just cherry juice, and just blueberry juice. And I'd use that to dilute the honey. And I think the American Homebrewers Association has this recipe as well up on their website with my attribute to me about, it's originally based off of the recipe I got from Kurt.
It's there, actually. I saw it.
It's got a really nice dark burgundy garnet hue to it. So it's really got this, should be able to see through it like Doug is showing here. And it's crystal clear. So, I mean, when I used to make this as my homebrew mead, I'd make it and it would be ready to enter competitions within 3 months. So you get the fermentation going, you use staggered nutrients to augment your yeast lack of nutrients from the honey. But cherries have a lot of nutrients, so it's kind of I've learned a lot more in the last 9 years than I had when I used to make this at home. But, so what Doug's doing right now is he's going to capture this aroma. So you get a really good swirl going. You're going to nose it first or take a look at the color. I like to smell first and then go back and evaluate the color profile. But you're smelling the rich currants and the cherries are right there. The blueberry is kind of light in the middle, but you can smell all 3 fruits. You can smell the honey. It doesn't smell like raw honey.
Oh, no.
It smells like an amazing, complex, almost like an American port type of flavor to it, aroma.
Now, the blueberry's tough. But a blueberry is a real tough item to get in anything.
It's the totality of what you're trying to smell, and not the independent pieces. I think it was San Diego where Gordon had asked me to talk at the BJCP member meeting about mead judging, and one of the pieces I learned early on in mead making is don't try to tear it apart. You don't start eating sausages trying to figure out what all the pieces are that are in a sausage, right? You really want a really nice tasting sausage to taste delicious and not think about, well, is there fennel in there or is there garlic or cheese or or what else might be inside that casing that's going to make it taste the way it does. And so for me, when I smell this mead, I'm really looking for art in the glass, right? I'm looking for, is my nose going to react the same way that my eyes to the sight and my taste buds are going to react to the flavors? So I want, when I say totality of the beverage, I mean the aesthetics, I mean the aroma, and I mean the flavor. And then additionally to the flavor is the finish. How clean is it going to finish on the palate? Oh man, I love this mead. So a lot of beautiful flavors exploding across your taste buds, almost a drying finish. You'd be hard pressed to understand and see that there's almost 5% sugar left in solution here. So, the current and the perception of sweetness can really be different than what your hydrometer may tell you. So if you're entering a mead to a competition, you need to be mindful of what your judges are going to perceive. Because if you were to enter this as a sweet mead, even though it's sweet by all definition, it doesn't present sweet. Right? The currant and the cherry are giving you the pucker power to it's hitting me already. But it gives you that really beautiful sense of flavor and a lot of complexity to it.
What I love is just bursting with flavor and it just hangs. I mean, it hangs on and it's so pleasant. It's almost like you put a piece of candy in your mouth and it just keeps going and going. I mean, you can it lingers so nicely.
That's the other piece of really well-made mead, which is the best way I try to describe is like hang time. So how long does that flavor oscillate on your taste buds? Like I can taste the currants, I can get to the blueberry, I get to the cherry, I get to the honey, and it starts all over again. So I'm really looking for overall, how do all the pieces tie together?
Yeah, but I mean, it's just so different than other beverages, and I'm thinking particularly like an IPA. That can have phenomenal flavors, but you're left with this bitterness which you expect and want in an IPA. But it's not. This is so much more pleasant.
Well, the roadmap from mead making is infinite. I mean, there's no style categories beyond the hugest buckets you can possibly think of, which is mead with fruit. What kind of fruit? So some of the bigger competitions like the Mazer Cup will break it down to stone fruit or berries or apples for a sizer, for example, or grapes for a piment. But there's really almost any infinite amount of combinations, and nobody can tell you it's right or wrong other than do you enjoy it? And when I started making meads, first time I ever met Charlie Papazian, I was at the Chicago National Homebrewers Conference back when it was called that. And I brought a bottle of my piment that I made that was made with New Hampshire Concord grapes. And I was just so excited to have, this mead and to share it with Charlie, who I saw as kind of like a founder of this hobby that I really kind of was over the moon for. And, I don't even know if he ever had it. I mean, I gave him the bottle. I didn't ask his feedback on it, but, over the years, I learned to figure out how to make meads that I really enjoyed and that I could share with my friends. And I happen to have an awful lot of now commercial mead makers that are really good friends and a lot of really good homebrewer friends that are incredible mead makers. So if you want to get good at making mead, find the mead makers that exist out there and start learning from them. I mean, I'm very happy to talk about, the meads that I've got and what inspired me to make them. And sometimes it's my own craziness of picking up ingredients and trying to figure it out. Like we made what we called monkey business, which is a banana, chocolate, orange, and vanilla mead. I just I came across a bucket of organic banana puree with vanilla. And I said, okay, now what am I going to make with this? And, I worked through the logistics in my head of, okay, I love bananas and, vanilla is going to work nice, but maybe a little chocolate is going to kind of add a little more of a nutty character to it. And, and how do I tie it? And then the orange was just, chocolate and orange is a great combo. So we use sweet orange peel in that. And, and tying it all together, and then going to a festival in Ohio, no less. And, I get there, it's my birthday. I've been working all day. So, I haven't had really lunch or dinner. And I walk into this festival and they've got this huge trophy. And I see this trophy and I'm looking at it and I go, what's with the trophy? And they go, oh, it's for the best beer tonight. And I go, well, what if a Mead wins? And they looked at me like I had two heads and said, that doesn't happen.
They all laughed.
Yeah, well, that was a funny story until the end of the night when they tapped me on the shoulder and said, you ought to come outside. We're announcing the winners. And I said, well, that's probably a good sign. And I walk out the door and they got a band playing in there and they announced the third place and it's not me. And I'm like, well, that's cool. Maybe I'm second or something, maybe tied here. And then they get to second and it's still not me. And I'm going, they didn't just drag me out here. And then they call my name and I just lost it. I really just lost it. I mean, you got to understand how personal what I do is and how I take everything I do to heart. And I've put everything I own to this company. And I've done it for the main reason of wanting to have the best possible mead in the marketplace available. And that's why I'm willing to help people learn how to make better mead. That's why I'm here, after hours trying to do this. And that's why I've traveled to, Uruguay, Chile, Argentina, Australia, Belgium to talk and present about my meads. It's because I love this stuff more than anything else in the world. And it drives people crazy. They see how much passion I have. I get customers coming in the tasting room and, they've seen me talk somewhere and they've heard that passion. And, I really don't even get to do the tours and tastings here anymore. I really spend a lot of time on these computers. and doing
you thought you were getting away from that, right?
Well, that was the goal, right? I was an executive in a software company making a very decent living. And, now I live in an apartment. And, we needed to downsize. But, living in an apartment isn't really what I had in mind. But, I'm willing to take the risks that I have to take to really grow this business to something that will become mainstream.
So Michael, this is our very first commercial calibration, and so what I'd like to discuss, and I'm a little, I like to ask lots of questions, as you've had to endure a lot of those already, and mead is new to me, so I'll ask extra dumb questions.
Sure.
But I know in the BJCP tasting exam, they served me the meads probably 40 degrees. I mean, it came out of a cooler full of ice and just like they would the beers. Now, in our commercial calibration today and setting the standard going forward, what should we do?
I would recommend not refrigerating your mead or making it ice cold for judges. And here's the reason why. It's complicated, but my theory on the reason why. The colder you make any beverage, and if you were to be a restaurant and serve Budweiser, it's written that it must be served ice cold, right? It's part of their contract. They don't want you to taste the ingredients. They want you to taste this cold liquid beverage. When I want to evaluate a mead, especially one that has fruit or spices or with honey, the colder you make it, the less you taste. So if you keep it closer towards cellar temperature, high 40s, lower 50s, maybe even up into the 60s, you get a really, really rich, deeper flavor that allows you to evaluate all the critiques of it. So think about wine judging, right? So when you go to judge a wine competition, and I've done my share of wine competitions at this point, and it's really a different world than trying to judge beer. So with beer, you're trying to take your time, you're trying to evaluate and provide score sheets and everything. Wine competitions are completely the opposite. Here's a flight of 6. You got 10 minutes to go through all 6 and give a little, highest scores and lower scores, and really no comments and no feedback to the participant. But you're really trying to deal with like 20 to 40 Chardonnays or 20 to 40 Cabernets. And, and it's grueling work. It's a lot of work to sit and spend an entire weekend, judging, and you come out at the end of the night and your teeth are all purple and you're getting carrots throughout the day so you can kind of clean your palate. And I feel like I've eaten carrots and I've just turned my mouth into this real train wreck. And what it's taught me is that the temperature for where to serve a mead, and mead is technically a honey wine, right? We're bonded as a winery, even though the little sign behind me says brewery. It's so much different than beer, and the only similarity to beer is you make beer with water. You make mead with water, usually. And it has yeast. That's about the totality of this likelihood of why it's similar. Now, you don't typically use water in winemaking. Mm-hmm. So I could equally argue that it's less like making wine than more like making beer. And beer, at least at the home side, includes it in the competitions. Commercial, forget it. There's not a commercial winery competition that wants mead to participate. And I don't know why. I don't know why it's a struggle for wineries to accept that people who have skills to become artists to make a fermented beverage from basic ingredients like honey and juice or honey and fruit or honey and spices or just even honey have a skill that may surpass what the wineries have. Mm-hmm. And it's different. I mean, I've been to a highly regarded wine college where the winemakers tried to make mead, and it was not palatable the first time they tried this. It was not even close to what a home mead maker that's been doing this for a while, have really learned and refined their skills, were up to. So it's not like making wine, and it's not like making beer. It's like making mead. And the one thing I've learned over time is you got to make a lot. You have to spend your time and do your, as Carvin Wilson says, do your homework, do your time, put your time into making mead. Understand what honey tastes like, and each varietal of honey tastes differently. One of the questions I was asked or answered already was, can you make a base mead and then kind of back sweeten it with a varietal honey to kind of get that flavor, because varietal honey is expensive. I can't say you can't do it that way, but I can say I've never tried to do it that way. So for me, when I'm trying to think about that flavor, and the best I can really relate it to is being an artist, right? So I don't have the skills to paint to save my life, but painting is really applying paint to a canvas, right? So you have an easel and I don't even know what the thing's, whatever. You have the paint and you have the paintbrush and you're trying to create this likeness, and you can see it in your head. So it's your mind's eye. Well, that's how I see the flavors of what I'm trying to create. So I'm trying to think about, how do I want it to smell? I think about how I want it to taste. I taste the water we use. When I started my commercial meadery, I was afraid to move outside of the water supply that I had been using since 1995, because our water comes from a lake up here in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Auburn, called Lake Massabesic. It's a reservoir. Here in New England, as we get a lot of rain, we get some higher pH on it, and as we have a drought, we get a little more mineral content. So my water really has a frame that can go, high to low, depending on where it's at during the time of the year. So, in yeast loads, the wild yeast that's available in the meadery is significantly different in the middle of summer than it would be in November or January, for example. Now, I'm crazy enough to try to play with Brettanomyces, Lactobacillus in some of the meads and ciders we make. And we do barrel aging, and we have our barrels right beside the other barrels. And I've been to places where like, oh no, we have a clear distinction between wild on one side and non-wild and non-equipment. And we've taken a different tactic on that. We've really worked to embrace some of the wild natures. All of our ciders, for example, are made in foeders. And these foeders, it's a method solaris. So as we pull the mead or cider out of the barrel, we'll put more in.
Help me with that word, methysolaris. I don't know.
So it's a style of winemaking where they never fully empty the barrel. So you get older, more complex flavors because there's always older and more complex wine, mead, cider in the barrel. So as, like I said, this artist that's trying to create flavors, it's hard to differentiate yourself. How do you make a mead, for example, that's aged in a barrel taste different, or that people are willing to pay $125 a bottle for? You leverage your friends. You get some barrels from like Sam Adams, and I put my time in. I did my homework. I ran their Patriot and long shot competitions for many years, and when they first asked me if I could run a competition, they never asked me had I done it before. And I led with confidence and said, of course I can do this. I was a vice president of a software engineering company. What I was good at is logistics, managing people to get the job done. So when I would show up to run the competition, all my homework, all my work was done ahead of time. So I walked around like I had nothing to do. But it was all that hard work that went into it up until that point in time to make it look easy. And when somebody like me or any number of the really should be famous mead makers that I know, like Tom Repus, Laura Augustine, Carvin Wilson, when they put their mind to making a beverage, Jim Davis is another one that comes to mind, they know how to make it happen. They know, they've done their homework to think about the flavors, to think about how they pull it all together. And, it's hard to tell you how to evaluate when you get what is perfection in front of you. But what I would like you to remember is you can't take the points to your grave. There's no hoarding of points and you go home with the richest amount. If somebody makes something that is truly amazing to you, give it to them. Give them the best possible score you can. If you cannot articulate exactly why you're docking a point or 2 or 10 or 15, you're not doing your job as a judge. Your job is to really critically describe how somebody can improve what they've made or not. And if it's not improvable, and I get into a lot of philosophical arguments like, oh, there's nothing that's ever perfect. Not true.
So,
go ahead.
Michael, let's come back to the temperature. So what is, as future mead commercial tastings, commercial calibrations, what do we try and serve it at? So everybody's doing the same thing and we're getting a recommendation.
Well, ideally, you're probably going to be judging mead in a temperature-controlled environment. So not outside on a hot summer day, not outside on a cold winter day. So that takes away a lot of variability. So when I'm telling my consumers how to enjoy my mead, I'm thinking about the environment they may be in. So here in New Hampshire in the middle of summer, it's a little hot, not very humid, but it's a little humid. So I recommend it a little colder so that it's a little more refreshing. If I was to judge the meads, I would recommend them at cellar temperature at the coldest, so not in the 40s. Barely low 60s is where I'd be looking for. Now, I've judged a lot of competitions, a lot of meads where the meads come in ice cold, and what I'll do is I'll wrap them in my hand and let it warm up. And so as you let it warm up, you're going to smell the volatile aromas. Really, and this has been open now for probably, how long have we been talking? 40 minutes. And it's crystal, right? It's beautiful. It's sharp. It's beautiful. It's not hot, so you're not smelling. So when you're evaluating the nose on a mead, if you get fusel alcohols, they're gonna smell spicy, and they may smell a little solvent-like. If you're gonna detect diacetyl, you're gonna get that butterscotchy aroma. Oxidation is going to really probably show up more in the color, and then with the aroma of like a wet cardboard type of smell to it. Those are really critical faults, and really disqualifying for the most part. I mean, it should not advance to a next round if it has a significant fault in it, and clarity should be really, really spot on. So you don't want to see. Nobody's created New England style mead yet with all the haze that they're going crazy with in the IPAs. But the reason we have glassware is so you can evaluate that clarity. Right? It's kind of been this mission of man to create these crystal clear beverages because it's instinctive for us to want to drink clear things, and it probably dates back to water. right? If you're drinking cloudy water, you're probably getting pretty sick, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I really don't want to drink cloudy stuff just on nature or principle. I understand there are things that are not crystal clear, like orange juice, and you're kind of taught, hey, this is what orange juice looks like, and we get used to it. But in cider, raw apple juice is hazy as well. And if you let it clear, it's usually got alcohol in it. So, I really try to strive for crystal clear. You want to look at the glass to see if there's any legs forming on the inside of the glass as it happens. That could be the cause of the viscosity or the amount of residual sugar that's left and the amount of alcohol that's given it legs and how quick it may fall to the sides of the glass. And then you want to look at the whether it's still or carbonated or slightly carbonated. And be mindful that if you're judging mead at a higher altitude, say Colorado, Rocky Mountains, you may get more perception of carbonation because somebody down at the sea level may have bottled it and the atmospheric pressure is a little different than what you're going to see at the top. But the last thing you want to see when you're taking bottles out at a competition and unwrapping them is see bottles explode because that means the person making the mead has not taken the time and energy to do their homework, to understand when it was actually done fermenting so that it could create something that is shelf stable and ready for consumption or entering into a competition. You don't want to hurt somebody when you enter a competition. And I got real lucky one time that I didn't get hurt. The bottle exploded, glass went 20 feet around me, but thankfully it was down by my feet and not still in my hand near my face where I was trying to read the label. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, so, as I've gotten older and wiser, I've tried to have to make choices. And that's why I've canceled Mead for Your Die, other than it's not quite legal for a winery in New Hampshire to host a mead competition and bring mead into the state with the laws that we have. Now, I could certainly work to change the laws, but, I like to see. I got a lot of grandkids, and I don't want to have to risk my ability to do that based on a competition anymore.
Well, thank you. This is our first commercial calibration. This is a phenomenal mead, and it is a BJCP example style of the Melomel, is it not?
Yes, it is. I am deeply honored to have my name on the front cover of the BJCP mead style guidelines. I worked with Gordon Strong on helping to refine the style category, and I think truly blessed to have a great number of our meads chosen as de facto standards for the BJCP style categories, and pretty much all those are available on our website if you wanted to partake and purchase more bottles, or come by and visit us. We tend to, I'm here most days of the week, but I do a lot of traveling as well.
Well, and I also want to thank Matt Granaham at Rat Distributors. He helped me put my hands on this desire. It turned out, I guess because of the webinar, they were sold out at wherever I was looking for them, and I could not find one in Greenville. So thank you, Matt. You really bailed me out for this because I'd have looked really bad in front of Michael as far out as we had planned this. So, well, let's take a look at the polls right quick, and then let's jump into the main part of your presentation. As far as the degree of mead experience, it looks like 50% of our audience enjoys mead and brews it a little bit, and that even moved up a little further. And we have 100% of the people that are participating. This is their first Moonlight Mead. So you have a lot of new potential customers, it sounds like.
Awesome.
So, Michael, let's jump into the presentation. A brewer gone mead. How did that happen?
It's a story. So way back in 1995, I was starting to fall in love with really good beer. My children were pretty young and small, and I realized beer was expensive. And my father had brewed beer for a little while back in the late 70s, so I wanted to really kind of play around with this concept of making my own. So I brought a kit off the internet and joined the American Homebrewers Association, and I searched for homebrew clubs. And so then I found that there was Brew for Your Die here in New Hampshire, and I joined. My first meeting was June of 1995. And I had already had 2 or 3 batches of beer going at that point in time. And a couple months later, they were having I joined them. June was my first meeting. July, they had a joint party with the Boston processors. And that's where I really got introduced to mead. And I didn't know I was getting introduced to mead. So a gentleman, Greg Kushmarek, offered me a sizer. Now, I had no idea what a sizer was, but I didn't want to embarrass myself and say that, so I passed the glass over. And if you've ever seen a little baby try something it loves for the first time, my eyes popped right up with a big smile, and I said, "Oh my God, what is this?" He said, "Apple mead." I'm like, "What is mead?" He said, "A wine made from honey." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I was a beekeeper. I used to have bees on, and honey doesn't go bad, so how do you get the ferment?" And he proceeded to tell me, and there's a photo down in my tasting room of the first 2 batches of mead that I ever made. And here's the thing you got to understand. Back in 1995, there was no cameras in my pocket. I had to go buy film. I had to get this thing developed. Then I had to hang on to this photo for the last 24 years. So mead changed my life the second I tried it. And the first 2 batches didn't really come out all that great. One exploded all over the kitchen because I had used this little blow-off tube, and the pineapples had clogged up the blow-off tube and just pressure built up and blat. And the other one was just, really crazy. I don't think I had enough yeast in the house, and so I just grabbed some Fleischmann's bread yeast and just went to town. I mean, I was completely non-conventional, a home brewer by the seat of my pants, just willing to risk it all because of the way that I learn and process information. I like to make mistakes and learn from them. My father taught me that, if you were to put in your own carpet, and even if it came out wrong, you tear it up, put in a whole nother one, and use that experience and still come out ahead of having hired somebody else to do this. So this is kind of how I was brought up, which is don't be afraid to try.
Now, you didn't mention how those first meads turned out.
So
you skipped that part.
Yeah, the pineapple mead took probably about 4 years to get drinkable. Because what I never understood about fermentation and sweetness of fruit is that in honey, so pineapple is a very acidic fruit.
Yeah.
And it's really sweet. And the reason it tastes good is because it's sweet and acidic. And when you ferment the sugars away, you have this really acidic, dry mead that really tastes really acidic and not very well balanced. However, letting it sit for 4 years in my basement allowed that pH to modify and change and get more complex. And by the end of the time, I pulled out samples at a BFD party I was having at my house, and there were guys there talking about mead, and I'm like, "Hang on a minute, I got one down in the basement I want you guys to try." And I ran down to the basement of my house, and I pulled a sample of it from this keg, and I bring it upstairs, and I'm so proud I've got this 5-year-old mead, and I wanted people to try it, and they took a sip, and they looked at it and said, "This is phenomenal. Why the hell did you make this?" And that was a mead that I was going to dump down the drain 5 years prior. So while you're learning and making meads, I mean, if it's infected, you don't have a lot of choices. But if maybe all the pieces aren't just right, but they're close, give it time. Give it a lot of time. I made this mead here at the shop that was made with Scottish honey or heather honey from Scotland. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a really earthy, funky honey that's just dark, so it's high in mineral content. The darker the honey, the higher the mineral. And I wasn't so sure about it. I mean, I really just didn't really think it was going to work. And Gordon Strong, president of BJCP, I think, and I don't know how many levels he is now for his grandmaster, but really well. I love Gordon. He's a good friend of mine. We've been to other parts of the world together, and drank just about every fermented beverage you can imagine. And so he's here at the meadery, and I've got samples of this, and I'm telling him I'm probably going to throw it away. And he goes to me, he goes, "Michael, about 10 years, this is going to be phenomenal. Just be kind and patient with it." So we had some more of those Sam Adams Utopias barrels, and we put the mead in those barrels and let it age. And it's been over 6 years now. And wow, just it's not even close to what it used to taste like. It's not even like you would even be able to draw a line and say, "Oh, this to here is where it goes to with 6 years of aging." So you have to be able to take risks and think about those flavors, and know that maybe at the end of 6 years it still sucks, but at least you know further off, right, taking up some space in your house. I mean, I can't remember how many carboys and 5-gallon corny kegs I had in my house, but when I said I'm a beer geek, my license plate said brewer. I had a 20-gallon brewery built into the basement of my house, a 10-tap kegerator, and probably $5,000 to $6,000 worth of beer that were aging in my basement. Some of them locked into airplane container boxes, so I wouldn't get to them. So I'm pretty historically known for when a party's going on, I'll crack into some of the really crazy expensive stuff just because I like to share. However, the traditional mead that I made back 24 years ago, unmemorable. Really, it was probably something I drank, maybe used to blend with something else. And that's the other wonderful thing you can do with mead. So if you get a mead that's too sweet, save it, because then you can blend it with a mead that's too dry and get it to perfect, right? So I don't like to add honey post-fermentation because I'm really cognizant of what raw honey tastes like, and it's just different. And the way I can best describe it to you is my mother used to make homemade meatloaf, and she'd cook ketchup on the top of the meatloaf, and it tasted different than if you were to put ketchup on the side of a plate after once it's made. So similar things. The honey molecularly must change in some capacity to become richer and fuller as it ferments.
Wow.
And maybe it's because the different sugars ferment differently, but.
So it sounds like the real art in brewing mead is, and I know you're going to get into ingredients, but mead, a lot of meads, if it doesn't get infected, can eventually be good. So one of the biggest parts of the art in the glass is the ability to do it faster in a reasonable period of time that you could do it commercially.
It still takes about 3 months on fastest scales.
Well, that's better than 4 years.
Yeah, well, what I learned along the way is rehydration. So if you're using dry yeast, rehydrate your yeast, not just in the mead. So I used to sprinkle the yeast on the top and just let it go. I'm like, well, it's sucking in water or juice from the mead. What's the difference? And the difference is you're adding amino acids, and those are making healthier, stronger yeast that are able to do the job without getting stressed out. Mm-hmm. And then I learned about staggered nutrients, and by staggered nutrients, it's dosing of nutrients over a course of 4 additions. So you can calculate how much nutrients, yeast assumable nitrogen you need. We use organic nitrogen at this point. And really what we're trying to do, again, is grow a really strong, healthy colony of yeast to do the job. Excuse me as I enjoy this this mead a little more.
And that's because as compared to beer, there's a big difference in yeast, in the nutrients, correct? In mead versus beer?
It's called YAN, yeast assumable nitrogen. Beer has a lot of it, or malt has a lot of it. Grape wines have sufficient amounts. Honey has close to none. So if you were to make a straight up traditional mead with no nitrogen, the yeast is going to it's like, climbing a hill. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm dying here. Give me something to work with. And, you could do 2 things. And this is my philosophy on this, and not per se fact and science. You could use 5 times more yeast and no nitrogen, or you could use that your normal pitching rate and use your nitrogen, so that while there's oxygen and nitrogen in solution, the yeast stays out of production phase and stays in growth phase, so they're multiplying. Mm-hmm. And so if you're using a yeast like we're using, which we use Lavalin 71B, and we use GoFirm to rehydrate the yeast, and then we use Fermade O to energize the yeast for the first 3 days, and then when it's almost close to finish the sugar, you add that 4th addition to kind of give that yeast that final bump down the hill as they finish up. And
did I hear you describe the must one time, that it's like a nutrient desert?
Maybe. I don't remember saying that. I don't know.
I'll give you all the credit.
I don't know if I was drinking a lot of mead that day or not, but and it is. But it literally,
is it accurate?
No, it's 100% accurate. Which is there's nothing there for the yeast to live Well, the sugar. So yeast, its goal in life is to consume sugar, and for every 1% of sugar, it's creating 50% by volume or molecular weight alcohol and 50% by volume CO2. And so, like if you're working with a small carboy that's starting around 32 bricks, you can literally watch the volume go down in the fermenter because the CO2 is coming out of solution, and you can see that you've created that much more. The sugar levels going down. That's one way to keep track of what's going on in your fermenter. So we're making, for National Mead Day, I made a few different batches of mead here at the shop, really just playing around with the ingredients I had. I bought some honey from my local apiarist in town, and I got a hold of some different juices I had, and really don't know what they're going to taste like, but I wanted to play with what we had. So I've got a sour cherry, pomegranate, cranberry, elderberry mead going, and then I've got this multi-fruit, more like a berry, I forget what they call them, not Slurpee, but I guess the equivalent of Slurpee. So some sort of berry mix that they use to make a slushy. So it smells fruity. Yeah. I'm not sure where it's going to go, but it's a small batch, and we try to really play around with some small batches for more of our exclusive club members that we have.
So getting those nutrients into that nutrient desert of the must, there's a certain period of time you recommend to keep feeding that in there.
Yeah, it's 28 hours, 48 hours, and 72 hours after initial pitch, and then 1 week after initial pitch. So whatever that number of hours is, but a week later. And those 4 additions, so you calculate what you need and then divide it by 4, and that's how much you have. So in a 1,000-gallon batch, we're using about 1,100 grams. So you could pretty much divide that out. So it's about 1 gram of GoFirm per gallon to get, not GoFirm, Fermento to get your nutrient. So if you had 4 grams of Fermento, you'd have 1 gram the first day, another gram the next day, and another gram the third day, and then a week later you'd add your 4th gram.
So is there any dangers with just stirring that in?
Yep. Don't do it. So rehydrate your nutrients before you add them.
Yeah.
You don't want to create nucleation points for the yeast to be able to degas all that CO2. So either with some sterile water or pull a sample with a sanitized thief into your into a little cup, stir it all up, get it fully dissolved. Slowly, very important, slowly add it back into your
this
fermenter.
one, another one of those lessons learned.
Oh yeah, we've overflown tanks as large as 1,000 gallons with must coming out the top of the tank, all over the place. And if nothing else, mead must is sticky, and we have no floor drains in the building at all. So we mop, and we're really good at mopping.
So will the nutrients dissolve readily into the must if you don't use sterile water? I mean, how do you know? Because it sounds like you don't want any nucleation points, so that means it needs to be fully dissolved.
Yeah, so stirring it, so you probably want it 10 times. So if you're going to use a gram, you're going to probably use about 10 grams of liquid. Yeah. I know you don't measure liquid by the gram, but, volume-wise, about 10 times as much.
Okay, and it'll dissolve in readily, and then you just slowly add it?
Stir it in as hard as you can. It doesn't hurt to add oxygen.
No, I meant once you've got it dissolved, and now you're going to add it back to your vat.
Yeah, you don't have to do much more at that point. Okay. So if you were to make a mead where you just put honey and let it sit all at the bottom of the tank, and put your water or juice on top of it, and not actually blend the honey and juice together, your yeast will fully integrate all that honey through the vortex that it creates in the fermentation cycle. So you can watch, and I've done this, I've measured it. It's about 1/8 of an inch per day where the honey goes down. And it's a really neat experience to experiment to see and to learn how fast does yeast mix honey into solution. So one of the tricks they tell you if you're learning how to make wine is you start with a little bit of sugar in your solution and you gradually add more so that your yeast is not getting shocked. I never bought into that theory. I was always making like my blueberry wines that just, truckload of, blueberries and a truckload of cane sugar and just a little bit of grape juice concentrate to add structure. And I'd have people waiting an hour, in line for chasing the stuff. And it was a monster. I mean, it was probably a 15-16%, dessert style wine that I'd bring to the Homebrewers Jamboree that takes place up here in New Hampshire. And if anybody's around the second weekend of September, or post the weekend after Labor Day, this thing's a mecca at this point. It's kind of like Burning Man, but it's homebrewers that have really gone to the nth degree. And I was one of the first to ever show up with a jockey box, and that was so long ago. Now there's trailers of jockey boxes and furniture built in, and the guys from the South Shore Homebrew Club really go to town and have banners and billboards, and the Homebrew Club, which I still am a member of, Brew for Your Die, shows up with 2 or 3 jockey boxes with close to 20 taps. So you got to pace yourself and be prepared that there's a crowing rooster at 5 a.m. that wants to keep you awake, and you may not be able to sleep as long as you might want to, especially as you're cracking 50 like I am. But yeah, it's good.
Well, Michael, I remember you talking about tasting. So at what point do you start tasting the must to decide that it's really what you want?
So I'd say probably about a week to 2 weeks in. And by that point in time, it's not must anymore. It's definitely fermenting. It'll probably be pretty hazy. Probably have a lot of, carbonation still in it as you want to try it.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to be able to pull samples to track how effective your fermentation is. And as any burgeoning mead maker, from some guy that's done it from the ground up of just not caring and trying to do it the fastest way possible, taking the time to record, what your active pH is, what your, fermentation's looking like, your profile, that allows you to get better at it. I mean, when
now you said pH, what profile are you talking about?
Oh, it depends on what you're starting with. The lower the pH, the slower the fermentation. Too high will cause infections. So
okay. So the profile you're talking about is the pH profile, as you're tracking its
So
rise
you want to
or
check
fall.
your gravity. So how much yeast, so what your trend level is looking like down. If you're seeing it get stuck, so it's staying at the same level, 2 things could be happening. So you could be at a cold enough temperature where the yeast is slowing down because it's cold.
Mm-hmm. What is cold?
Low. It depends on your yeast. For the yeast we use,
what you use?
Below 64, it really starts to slow down. But we have chillers on our tanks, not heaters. So if it's January here, my meadery could be in the low 50s, and so my fermenters could get colder than I would want them to. So everything slows down at that point in time. And the other thing would be the pH has dropped too much, and the yeast is just stuck. Now, 2 ways to solve that: time, or try to augment your pH with salts that you may have. Now, the challenge there is honey's a buffer. So you may adjust your pH to where you want it to be. So you've come up from maybe 3.2 to 3.7, and come back the next day, measure it again at 3.2. So that's a challenge that you have to have. My typical style of making them is not to try to adjust the pH of an ongoing or a mead that I've made. We really don't keep a lot of chemicals around to do that kind of adjustment, because I personally don't understand a lot of the science behind it. I mean, I do, but it's not my strength, right? I can do it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you want to make this taste like this is how you do it. But it's really, for me, I really look at the additions of the fruits to do that balancing act. Like our cranberry mead that we're going to release nationwide in the next couple months is called No Need to Argue, and it's what took Best of Show for mead and cider at the San Diego International Competition. It's the cranberries, the balance, the fruit. It gives it that tartness that just really
Mm-hmm.
pulls it all together, and it's got this color that almost looks like candy apple. It's just brilliantly clear cranberry color to it, and the honey's there, and it's all just well tied together. And to win, it's it's still such a joy to win a competition like that
Sure.
and not know this is happening, or even there was an award for this. I mean, it's my son lives in California now, so he was at the festival, and he's like, "Dad, we won." I'm like, "What are you talking about? We won?" He goes, "No, you won for best of show." And I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty cool."
That's
And
phenomenal.
it's again, it's when you fall in love with mead and you fall in love with the flavors and the aroma and the characteristics, you drive yourself to find how to replicate that. And as a home brewer, I made 60 batches of single source varietal honeys in 1 year in half-gallon batch sizes. So I took every growler I had, and my whole basement was chock full of growlers of fermenting mead, because I wanted to understand how honey tastes from different types of flowers.
Sure.
And so I wanted to control the temperature, I wanted to control the yeast, I wanted to control everything to have it be similar. And then I'm at a national homebrewers conference, can't remember which one, and I'm in a suite with Gordon Strong, Susan Rude, Kurt Stock, my friend Kurt Demmer, and several others, and we're doing blind tastings of these meads, because I wanted to then get unbiased feedback of what they could taste from all these different types of flowers. So here I am, this nut of a home brewer, showing up with cartons and cartons of different meads, because I wanted to share and get their opinions of,
Yeah.
what do you think about a Christmas berry mead? What do you want? And so, I could outline the type of honey, and then I let these people who are now like grandmaster judges evaluate and give me feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And it would kill me to enter 50 different meads into a competition to, I'd go broke. But, it's hard to and part of the challenge to anybody who's entering competitions is understand there's a huge variation between your mead judges. I mean, I've been blessed to be able to go and judge best of show mead tables all over the world at this point, from Australia to Argentina to National Homebrewers Conference to the Mazer Cup. I've lost count at how many times I've judged competitions. And I think I've got well over 100 points now for both judging and, participation points and such over the years. And I'm getting old for doing this, but I love to give that feedback. And the recent trip to Belgium, this gentleman was there with a gift for me from his uncle that was not able to go to the festival I was at, and he brought a bottle of mead that he made based on one of the meads he tried that I made. And you can't discredit this stuff. I mean, it's a small community, and I look at mead makers as my colleagues, not my competition.
Well, and I love the community. I mean, at HomebrewCon, that was quite an event. What was that? Mead makers meet or whatever. It was just so great to see the camaraderie. So I think a lot of us would like to try our first mead. And could you summarize? I mean, I've heard nutrients because must is a nutrient desert, and it's got to be in there early. What else would you kind of summarize for those of us that may know how to brew beer but have never done mead before?
Think about it from an angle of proportionality. So 25% of my batches are normally honey, 5 volume.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to make a 4-gallon batch of mead, I'm starting with 1 gallon of honey, 3 parts or 3 gallons of water. Same is usually true for my fruit mead. So if I'm going to do like Desire, it's 1 part honey, 1 part cherry juice, 1 part black currant juice, and 1 part blueberry juice. A lot of sweetness coming from that because there's no water to dilute that down. And I've had meads that were just fruit and honey, sometimes a little over the top. So you can't, well, you got to be careful. If you're going to try to make a mead that's 40% sugar to start with, that's 1.160 starting gravity, it's got to be drinkable at the end, right? It can't be just a sugar bomb. Some people like really, really sweet stuff, and they may win a competition or at a festival. But if you're making something that people can enjoy and enjoy a glass of, it's got to be balanced. And if you hit me as a judge and it's too sweet, I'm going to take points down, because again, I'm looking for that totality. I want to be able to enjoy it as a beverage. I don't want to think about it as maybe a cocktail mixer. And I get asked about that all the time. Hey, we'll do a dinner with Moonlight Meadery. Would you mind if we blend them into cocktails? Yes, I do mind. I don't want you adding tequila to my mead and trying to pass it off as a mixer. There are people out there that really enjoy well-made meads, and they have rights. And
well, Michael, that actually brings me to a good point before we start moving into the questions, because I think we got some great questions here. When I was asking you the question, and I loved how you described it, because I think it actually extends beyond meads, but I was telling you that I was going to be judging some meads. Meads are new to me. It's a whole new experience. And I said, Michael, I wouldn't know what a 50-point mead was if it was handed to me right now. How would I know? And I loved your answer. Would you share it a little more
you
broadly?
You might have
here?
to remind me, because I wax poetically all the time. So the way it comes to my mind is, it's kind of like when you walk up to a beautiful piece of art and you look at it, and it's not just you that looks at this piece of art and you go, wow, that's a masterpiece, right? Like, you're looking at, we just got out of the Louvre a few weeks back, and every painting pretty much I saw, I was like, wow, that's just gorgeous. Look at the attention to detail and how all this fits together. And that's why, I can't say I term the term art in a glass, but I've done this before. I was at a mead mixer for UC Davis, and this mead got poured and put in front of me, and I will never forget this mead. This was, I'd like to call my friend Tom Repus's mead, and I took one sniff, and I knew immediately this was going to be amazing. And I looked at it, and I could see the color, and the clarity was all great. And I took one sip, and it just was like a little fireworks display for my taste buds. Every single aspect of that mead was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I exclaimed it as loud and as proudly as I could in this room of people, because if you've done the job to make something that amazing, I am honored to tell people how amazing it is. And at the last Mazer Cup, I was judging, and I had two 50-point scores, almost back to back. One was a cucumber and lime mead that I really found exceptional. And then I had a hibiscus cinnamon mead that I also found exceptional. And I worked with the home brewers to replicate their meads. And we brought both of them to HomebrewCon. I don't know if I could commercially find a viable market for the cucumber lime one. It was more unique to make on my own to really see if I could do it. I did it completely different than how the mead maker originally made it, and I don't know if mine compares to his or not. And then I tried to replicate Laura's mead with the hibiscus and cinnamon, and it's a mead that we'll be shipping. There's, I think, 2 kegs in the world that are going down to Louisville, Kentucky. And I will be honored to go down and join Laura and her homebrew club and sample that. So, just waiting on my distributor to pull the trigger on that order, and we'll get those balls rolling to make that happen. But it's crystal clear when you find something that's amazing. And I can think about like dinners I've had at Michelin 4-star or 3-star rated restaurants in Paris, where there was no question in my mind that this was amazing. And I can think of drinking like a 1942 Armagnac that was just, off the charts. You can't think of even how to describe some of these flavors. And that's what life is for. That's what we're here to do, which is give guidance, right? And if you can't find and articulate the challenges that you find with a mead, you have no reason not to give it a best of score possible.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we're going to jump into the questions. And again, for the audience, I know we're now a little bit beyond the top of the hour. If you need to take off, we completely understand. This is recorded, and you can catch the questions later. And if you've got to leave, please, we really appreciate you coming and sharing your time with us today. So, Michael, we're going to jump into the questions if you're good with that.
Sounds great.
All right. So we've got 10, and this one has been voted up from Greg. And Greg says, when adding fruit to a mead, do you suggest adding pre-fermentation, post-fermentation, both, or does actually the type of fruit matter?
Complex question. And if you asked 4 commercial mead makers and 4 amateur mead makers, they'd probably give you all 8 different answers. So for me here at Moonlight Meadery, my style of mead making, I prefer to add the fruit at the start. So honey, fruit always go together, no matter what the fruit is. Sometimes I might add the fruit before secondary, but always in primary. For example, we made a roasted pineapple chipotle mead. The pineapple we grilled up on the grill, and we added it as fermentation was kicking off for a few days. And the main reason there was it took me an awful long time to roast 240 pineapples in 1/4-inch slabs on my brand new Weber grill. Yeah. You want to be careful. You don't want to reuse equipment that could have smoky, like barbecue, pork. Or, be careful with how you prepare your fruits. Sure. Any other tips on there? The way I like to describe it is if you were to add the fruit in secondary, you get a more jammy, fruity note to it. I can tell you that I really like to go heavy on the fruit, as much as 6 pounds per gallon. So when we make our blueberry mead, 1,000-gallon batch, we'll split between 2 1,000-gallon fermenters and use 6,000 pounds of blueberries split between those 2 fermenters. So the mass of blueberries that we use to make this mead, it's 2 or 3 pallets of blueberries that come in 50-pound boxes. And the challenge when you make a mead like that is you have to then muck out all those blueberries when you're done. And that's a lot of physical labor. And there's nothing that can replicate those flavors. And for us to be able to process and handle that many blueberries, we have to freeze the blueberries first. So I typically like to suggest blueberries be frozen, or fruit you freeze to break down the cell membranes. Second would be pressing the fruit. My apples are always pressed when we're using those to make meads. I will use puree. Puree causes a lot of challenges for us here at the meadery because it takes up some volume. So you have a little higher loss ratio than you would if you have just extracts. The fruit flavor is a little more brighter and a little more crisper when it's puree versus when it's concentrate. But concentration, you can rehydrate or dilute back to normal strength, or you could even go a little stronger if you wanted to. So you can do some things with concentrates that you can't do otherwise.
So in general, is it pre-fermentation that you like to put
almost
in your
100% of the time.
Almost 100%. Okay. And the reason for that was it tends to be more jammy later on?
Less jammy, more integrated.
No. If you add it later, it becomes more jammy.
Yeah, correct. You're right.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, that's a great question, Greg. We'll go on to our next one. Oleg asks a question. How much balancing post-fermentation do you do in your meads, and what do you typically use? Acids, tannins, etc.
I've never made a mead where I've added tannins to it over the course of 24 years. Extremely rare that I would try to do an acid addition. However, some meads that I use and make, might use lemon or lime juice. So some of the meads, like my mojito mead, which is a lime and mint, we're using the lime closer to secondary, more as an acid addition in the flavors than you might have with using it in primary. So that's why I say most of the time we're putting fruit in up front. Fruit that are really tart can work later to give a little more balance. If you had a mead that was presenting a little flabby or a little sweet and you wanted to dial it in, that's where you could use that technique. Like I said, I don't feel comfortable trying to adjust things on the fly with acids like citric acid or anything too often. I mean, lime juice has citric acid in it, so technically I am doing it that way, but that is very few and far between.
So essentially what you're saying is you might add a little fruit. You never add tannins.
I've never, ever worked with tannins.
Okay.
Now,
Wow.
there may be tannins in the fruit that I'm using, but
Right.
I've never really kind of gone to add tannins to like a traditional mead.
And that's unusual, isn't it, for the mead makers?
I haven't done a poll.
Okay. I had the impression it was not unusual.
I know there are several that do, but I think that changes the profile and the structure pretty significantly. And I think you'd find that if you were to compare, and there has to be mead makers out there, amateur and pro, that can prove me 100% wrong. But I can think of at least two. So I would, for me, it's not my skill set. So like I said, I'm self-taught, learned how to get to where I want to get to without having to do that. And I like that I can do that. So that's why I like that.
Okay. Thank you, Oleg. That was a great question. The next one is from Ardura, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, Ardura. When doing a traditional mead using a varietal honey, do you use that honey from primary through back sweetening? I had planned doing that this way and using some meadow foam honey, but I was told a more neutral honey in primary and the varietal in the back sweetening was a better way to get the flavor. Does fermentation change the flavors so significantly that it isn't worth the extra expense of using a variety in primary?
So my experience to date has been always to use the varietal honey. I've never even thought of trying to make a mead with a regular honey, let's say an orange blossom, and then try to augment it at the end with a non, maybe multi-polyflower mead or honey. I avoid adding honey, raw honey, after for back sweetening. What I will do is I know where my yeast will go to, and I outpace where my yeast can ferment to. So I start with a higher percentage of sugar or honey in solution than what my mead can or yeast can ferment. So if I know my yeast will go to around 14%, I can make a mead that has 15% or 16, higher residual sugar so that I can have that sweetness level left. Or I will make an intentionally sweet mead, same process, and use that for blending to get to a lighter flavor. But I don't typically do that on my traditionals because I'm really looking to showcase that specific flavor. Now, we're a certified organic meadery for two of the meads that we make. So we're using wildflower honey that we're bringing in from Brazil or wildflower honey that we're bringing in out of Zambia. Both honeys 100% different, 100% profile difference, and you can't blend honeys from other sources to keep that certified organic status. So we can't really go and say, all right, we're going to use wildflower and just augment with Brazilian honey at the end to get that certification. Now, neither one of those meads have sulfites or sorbates added, so I have to really be pretty tight on how stable that mead's going to be when finished. And I haven't always been spot on with how to do that. Now, so you might see some slight carbonation when you open a cork, but we've not had any of those bottles pushing the cork out on its own. So it's another level of mastery to be able to have some carbonation without losing corks. But if you're seeing corks fly across the room, you really have no idea what you're doing.
So it sounds like the short answer to that is essentially you always just use the best honeys, varietals, and you would just back sweeten with another mead that you've done that is a little overly sweet. Is that kind of the short answer?
Yeah, but generally just try to know how far your yeast will go, and that's with trial and error.
Yeah.
And then you can make, I pull in meadowfoam honey. We make a meadowfoam mead from start to finish. So if you're buying any one of the Moonlight Meadery All Natural series of meads, it's that honey and only that honey that's used in that whole batch.
So it's more about controlling your process and then blending if as necessary.
Yeah, it's really rare that we're blending our traditionals, but yeah, it's possible. That would be my preference over back sweetening.
Okay. Ardura, that was a great question. This one's a little shorter, Michael. Tips for doing fresh peach mead. Why is it so difficult?
Well, so peaches, if you got the skins, you want to take the skins off. The skins can host a whole ton of wild flora and microfauna that can make your mead smell really, really funky. And I'm talking like you open a bottle and across the room you smell this and you go, that was one of mine. And that is not where I want my mead to be. A body odor type aroma, and yeah, it's not where you want to showcase your best. So what I tend to do now is we like to use organic puree, peach puree that comes in frozen, and part of that is because I'm trying to get a deep, rich peach flavor to my meads. Smitten in particular is one of the meads that we use this with. If I was to make it with fresh peaches, I would definitely take the skins off, take the pits out, puree up the mead or the peach, and really add it in primary. And I would suggest 4 to 5 pounds per gallon. But as we wait for Doug to come back, what else can I tell you about peach meads? So peach meads, if you make it, and you want it to be fairly sweet. So peaches have this real rich tartness to them, and that tartness really can kind of be off-putting if you don't have enough rich sweetness to go with the honey and the flavors that are going on. So, the sweet, richer flavors will help work better so that you can get that rich peach flavor.
I apologize. I had to step aside and fix a battery.
Yeah, no worries.
So, and you had kind of warned us starting out that peaches were extra tricky.
Yeah, well, like I said, I thought they were easy, and when I first made my first peach mead as a home mead maker, I was thoroughly disappointed, and I bought these not drops, but hailstone damaged peaches, and parboiled them, took the skins off and all that, and I think there was a batch or two I made without taking the skins off, and the pellicle I had on the top of that mead was just scary and just awe-inspiring at the same time. But like I said, you could smell that mead across the room when a bottle got open. You're like, oh no, they got into it. And, next thing you know, you're like, yeah, well, this one's a little wild and crazy. And they were like, whoa, because literally, if you can smell that funk from 6 feet away or more, you've kind of gone to a whole new level of wildness, and it's possible. It's not always enjoyable, but it's how it works.
All right. So Todd just put in the comments, well, maybe he'll do cherry instead of peach.
Yeah, climb to the top of the cherry tree, get hand-picked cherries. So we go to Sunnycrest Farm here in Londonderry, and I'm at the top of this ladder. Yeah, and I'm a 250-ish male, so I'm big. And I'm at the top of the ladder, at the top of the tree, and this 10-year-old starts climbing the same ladder. And I'm looking down and I'm going, young man, this ladder is probably not safe for me. And it's definitely not safe for the two of us. So go get your own ladder. and climb your own cherry tree. But the top of the tree gives you the sun-ripened, the richest flavored cherries that you can get. And you go buy a hand pitter and you hand pit those cherries. You don't have to slice them up, puree, or anything else. Just add them to your mead. And if you want to try my hand-picked cherry mead, it's called Entice. And this is the biggest, richest batch of cherries we've ever released in a mead.
Wow. Great question, Todd. All right, we've got another one. This one's from Tanner. And she asks, or he asks, I don't know, is it possible to fix or heal oxidation in your experience?
No. It's avoid it like the plague. It's usually an indication of something drastically gone wrong, not enough healthy yeast to start with, or somehow too much splashing towards the finish. I was publicly speaking at a talk, and I made the comment that I don't know how you make oxidized mead. However, I have some meads that I made 20 years ago that I've been unearthing as we've downsized out of my basement. And I have made oxidized mead. So a long time back. And maybe the age was too much or too little, or the bottles I put them in, not sufficient. But if it's a dark brown color and it's not the color you would expect, and the aroma is wet cardboard, it's gone. It's not worth trying to save. It's probably not even worth trying to distill down into something else. That flavor is going to just intensify, and it's just not right.
All right. But it is hard to oxidize mead, is it not?
Well, that's what I say nowadays, but I've been doing this for 24 years, so...
But not impossible.
Yeah, my last assistant mead maker, I was commenting on how well I liked one of my newest releases, and he goes, you've gotten better over the years. He says, and that's exactly what Gordon said. So I was kind of ribbon Gordon at a talk for the BJCP, and I said, well, Gordon gave me that mead that I made or I gave a bottle to Charlie Papazian. Gordon goes, yeah, it was foxy. So basically saying it had this really nasty aroma like a wet fox. And I'm like, bullshit, fucking bullshit. There's no way this had that kind of flavor and aroma. And my friend Kurt, who's been my lifetime best friend now for the last 37 years now. Wow. He was a steward at the table. He's hearing Gordon trash my mead, and I mean trash it. And I'm like, damn, this stuff's what I consider one of the best I'd ever made up until that point. And then Gordon got up after me at this speech, and he says, you've gotten better over the years, and I can appreciate that feedback, which is, no matter how full of yourself you get, there's always room for improvement. And I tend to be a little rich in bravado of my skills and my mead making prowesses. But the reality is I'm always learning.
Well, great. So, while not impossible, oxidation, once you get it, it's probably non-recoverable.
Yeah, you want to try to figure out what you're doing to help make that happen. I would suggest your yeast nutrient protocol is probably subpar, and maybe your honey or the fruit might have been, something was off. Airlock might have dried out. There's a lot of opportunities there. A lot of the airlocks we use at a commercial scale can't dry out. They're a little marble that pops up as the CO2 pushes it up, but otherwise it's a sealed vessel. It's a shame they don't make those for carboys, but career opportunity out there for somebody to make little marble airlocks.
Is the Mazer cup set up to deal with the serving temperature you recommend? Wow, Tom, I love that question.
I believe so. I think they store the meads in a room that's non-temperature, not refrigerated. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember. Years ago, it might have been colder. You got to remember, I've been going to Mazer Cup since before I started my company. So for the last 12, 13 years, I've been judging at these competitions. And, for some reason, I get asked a lot to judge at the tops. And, it's kind of funny. There's kind of really no hierarchy of mead judges like there are beer judges. So you just become certified or stamped as a mead judge. And there clearly needs to be a ranking system, because there are judges that really know what they're doing that are not BJCP grandmasters or whatever in the beer side that are decent on mead, but yeah, maybe they could use a little more skill, or they're dismissive of some of the mead judges that are really phenomenal mead makers that just aren't in the BJCP grandmaster level.
But temperature-wise,
Yeah.
that's high end of the cellar temperature range.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm sticking to that answer. I might be wrong, but sounds good.
I like
the people
it.
that put the Mazer Cup on do a phenomenal job. There's a mead competition coming up in Minnesota that I'm trying to see if I can make it out to, but I'd really love to go because I could probably see a lot of my friends out in the St. Paul area. But yeah, got to keep a company running.
Understood. Tom has another question. My wife really likes sweeter beverages, including mead. Yet every batch I've made tends to be too dry. How would I keep the sweetness without back sweetening with something like, and it looks like it got cut off, then he said aspartame or sweeten low?
Don't do it. Just up your honey load in the front. So maybe you're at 25% honey by volume, bring it up to 28, maybe 29% by volume honey. You'll get there. And if that's not enough, bring it up to 30. And that'll be beyond sweet for where you want to be. And you can blend it down if you need to. So if your meads are coming in too low, make one big. I'm not talking 40%. You really got to pretty much be a mead whisperer to bring a 40% sugar or honey mead down to the right drinkable level. So I deal in bricks. Everything we make are bricks is percent sugar, or percent sugar in solution, so honey in solution. Your fruit will add a lot of honey. Some of your fruits, the more acidity. So three things control the perception of sweetness: your alcohol level, your actual sweetness, and your pH, or your finished must. So all three are separate dials. So each one of those dials will contribute to the perception of sweetness. So if you want a real sweet mead, you're going to need to have a lower pH and probably a lower alcohol level and probably a pretty high sweetness level. But you could also have a fairly medium pH, medium alcohol level, or high, and still a really, really reasonable sweet. And a 5% residual sugar. So if you were to create a 14% mead, you need at least 28 points, bricks, to get to that. Half is alcohol and half is CO2. That means you're at 0. Mm-hmm. So then from there, add on how much more sweetness you want. So if you want a 1% residual sugar on top of that, you go to 29% residuals, starting gravity. You want to get a little bit higher. So let's say you're using black currants and blueberries and cherries, and you want to have 5 to 6%. You add 5 or 6% more points to that base recipe. So instead of a 28%, you're talking 32, 33% sugar solution in to give you that sweetness level. And you want to be crazy, you go a few more points and you got, wow, that's sweet. But then you can deal with that based on how much tartness you're getting. So my cranberry mead, which has a residual sugar of 6%, it's 28 plus 6. So 34. Sorry, math is my strong point, especially after a bottle of Desire. But it's all mathematical, and it's all about how it all pulls together at the end. But I've never, ever, ever added artificial sweetener to any of my meads, nor coffee for that matter. So I don't really have a lot of institutional knowledge of how that may or may not work.
That's just not your thing, is what I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I've made meads or braggots with commercial breweries where we use lactose. So the collaboration with Stone Brewing Company and Chris Ketchum, the brewmaster at Liberty Station, had lactose, and Mitch Steele also brewed that beer with us. And the lactose gave it the sweetness that we wanted, because when you're making a beer with honey, the honey ferments out. There's no sugar left at all.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is either augment your mash temperature up a few degrees, which gives you that unfermentable sugars, or add lactose, which is unfermentable. And so then you can get the perception of sweetness to balance the perceived sweetness you should have from the honey. But braggots is a whole separate conversation that me and Doug could have for another hour or two.
Hey, we'll have to break open the bottle.
Oh, good luck. Hard to find.
But yes. Tom, great question. Thank you. We have one from Dave. Any tips doing low ABV meads, 4 to 6%? Wow, that's down in the beer range.
Yeah. Do I want to share this? All right. Don't share this with the commercial mead makers, right? So here's my tip. Make a 14% mead and then cut it back. So just like making a really, really strong beer and cutting it back, like how Budweiser makes Bud Light or whatever, they optimize their fermentation tankage space by making a big beer and then cutting it back at bottling or carbonation time. So for us to get the mouthfeel that we want in our session meads, we make them big. And we make them to close to 14%, and then we bring it down to about 6.5% alcohol to get the flavor. And the significant difference is that mouthfeel from the fermentation cannot be replicated by making a really weak session mead, because the yeast will rip through that honey profile if it's 6% and leave you bone dry. And then you're trying to figure out how to get it somewhat sweet. But if you make a really big mead and cut it back and have a way to sterile filter, so get rid of all the yeast or to stabilize sulfites, sorbates, or whatever have you, then you can make a shelf-stable carbonated session mead that has the body and profile of a much richer mead.
So you're just adding deoxygenated water?
Yes.
Okay. And do you need to add any minerals to get so it doesn't get a inappropriate mouthfeel, or not
your
enough
water
minerals?
supply has to be pretty amazing.
Okay. So if you don't have it, should you try and use some sort of bottled water? I'm not thinking RO. I'm thinking of good quality mineral water or something.
I'd recommend that. Your water has to be paramount. It's the soul of your ingredients.
Yeah. So carefully is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, nothing like bringing back 5,000 cases as you learn how to do it. Right?
Okay, Dave, it sounds like you got your answer. We're almost down to the end of them. So Marmac has a question. Is it possible to top the fermentation to leave the mead sweet, and how?
So stopping fermentation is an art in itself. It's rather tricky. You can have a mead that you've aged for 4 or 5 years in a carboy, from my experience, that when you rack it and bottle it, it re-ferments and starts again. So it's normally a fairly complicated process. Cold, ice cold, bringing it down to help stop the fermentation, multiple racking events to get off the lees. Often requires sulfites and sorbates, and that requires a very accurate pH meter, understanding the molecular weight of your potassium metabisulfite, so you're adding the correct amount and dosage to stop and hold back. So it's complicated. It's
we could do a whole webinar on that. Sounds like.
Yeah, it's probably beyond the home mead maker level of acceptance. The other option is make them big.
Yeah. All right, Marmac, thank you. Great question. And this is our last question. And I know you're glad to see that. You're ready. I think you're ready to get home.
Yeah, my wife is calling me already. So.
Yes. Okay, we'll wrap it up with this. This is from James, and James says, talking about oxidation, I'm still having problems with fruit in primary getting oxidized during fermentation. It gets a cooked jam-like flavor. Any tips?
Adding it in primary, huh? I'd have to ask what kind of yeast you're using, and what kind of pitching rates are you going for.
Are you saying it must be sitting in fermentation too long?
No, what I'm thinking is the yeast is not creating a very active fermentation, and it's not getting the CO2 blanket it needs to protect it from oxidizing.
Ah, okay.
So if your yeast is not enough, it's going to struggle. And
Yep.
anybody that's ever cut up apples will know that you cut that apple, it starts turning brown. Well, that's oxidation. So, it takes a extremely healthy yeast pitch rate
Yep.
to get that protection layer going before you've got any oxidation that's going to happen.
Okay.
So I would immediately go to 2 grams per gallon pitch rate on something like that, so that you can really and start your starter. I mean, we add, of course, it's a 5-gallon starter that we're making, so we're using 500 grams of yeast. So we're pitching at 1 gram per gallon. We're adding 8 ounces of honey after we've added the Go Firm. So 110 degree water, add the Go Firm, stir it up, let it cool down a little bit, spread the dry yeast on top. Do not stir it. Let it sit for 10 minutes so the yeast gets the temperature. Must it in, wick it in, add 8 ounces of honey, wick that in, let it proof so the yeast starts to grow, whip it down in again.
Mm-hmm.
Cover the bucket with a stainless steel, listen to me, tin foil, so you're keeping turn off your fans, all that kind of stuff, so you keep out wild yeast. Let it grow to the point where it's almost like a Jiffy Pop popcorn. The tin foil's coming off the top. Whip it back down again. Temperate your must into the temperature you're going to pitch it into. And again, home brewing size, this is tiny, tiny volumes. But at a big scale, like 5 gallons of must or yeast getting pitched into a 500 gallon batch, you don't want to pitch, let's say, 80, 90 degree must into a 60 degree tank of potential must, because it'll shock that yeast. So then you start, balancing the temperature, add a little of the cold mead or cold must to the warm must to get that temperature within 5 degrees. So then when you add it, you're not shocking the yeast out. You should see positive airlock activity within 45 minutes.
So it sounds like the short answer to the question is
oxidized
fruit is coming from insufficient fermentation, or is whether it's pitch rate or selection of yeast, whether the nutrients are there. I mean, it's insufficient fermentation.
Based on the information I was given, I would say yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great question. Wow. Well, we got through them all. Well, James actually threw one more in there, and I think it's a quick answer, so we'll throw it in there. So James asks, "What's your favorite mead?"
Wow.
Good question, James.
I like to tell people it's the one in my glass. But the reality to that answer is right now it's Smite. So we made a peach mead with chipotle spices. So I took Smitten and I added some chipotle to it. And the chipotle is more of an accent piece towards the back of the palate. So to work with chili peppers, whether it's ghost, habanero, scorpions, or chipotle, you really need some body to that mead. You need some rich sweetness to fire down, to tamp down that fire that's going to come from those peppers. And how I make those is I time how long the mead's going to be on that spice. So we didn't talk a lot about methylglens because this was a mellow conversation, but and wait till you get to try some of the Decadence series we have coming out. So we have a chocolate, a raspberry with coconut, and we have a chocolate covered cherry, so cherry Decadence and raspberry Decadence, and 2.5 kilos of chocolate in a 5-gallon batch. I can't be held responsible for any acne that might come as a result of this, but it is chocolate, and I mean chocolate with a lot of chocolate. And the fruit just holds up to it all. So, very, very, very small limited releases. likely our Lunar Society members are going to get all of them.
Well, I just love all the bold flavors of your meads. They're fabulous, and they are scary smooth.
Well, I really want to thank you, Doug, for giving me the opportunity to talk about my love and my passion. And for all the people that joined in and heard about this today, I wish you luck on your endeavor to learn about making better beverages and judging them. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, listen, the pleasure was all ours, and you gave us a discount code. BJCP gets us $5 off of 2 bottles, as I recall.
Yes.
So thank you, Michael. We really appreciate you. Our very first Mead webinar, this was fantastic. I knew it would be great after our pre-online meeting, and then we met at HomebrewCon. I hope we can get you on again and talk about some other subjects. Meanwhile, you need to get home, so let's wrap this up right quick. For the audience, thank you, everybody, for spending a few minutes with Michael and myself. We really value your time, and we thank you for spending that time with us tonight. Please consider helping offset the expenses if you want to help me continue to provide these kind of webinars. And this webinar will be recorded, and I will send the link along with anything else that we mentioned out to you following the webinar. The webinar's replay will be available immediately, and I would encourage you to join the Facebook groups. So with this, thank you for joining Gourmet Brewing this evening. Michael, thank you so much. Get home to your beautiful wife.
Will do. Thank you, everyone. So much appreciated.
Goodbye. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.